They say love is brewed slowly, but Jamal was starting to think someone had spiked his cup. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen, mingling with the faint hum of morning traffic outside. Jamal Carter stood by the counter, his hands wrapped around a steaming mug, staring out at the dew-kissed garden of their suburban Atlanta home. It was a quiet Saturday morning, the kind he usually cherished. But today something felt off. He took a cautious sip, letting the liquid roll over his tongue. The flavor hit him like an unexpected slap, bitter, almost medicinal, with an undertone that made his stomach churn. He frowned, lowering the mug to inspect its contents. Nothing looked unusual. It was just black coffee, no cream or sugar. Yet there was something unsettling about the taste, as if it didn't belong in this house or on this earth. Jamal, his wife, Claire, appeared in the doorway, her blonde hair tied back neatly, wearing one of his old sweatshirts. She smiled softly, but her blue eyes darted toward the mug in his hand. "How's the coffee?" He hesitated, searching for the right word. "Different." Claire tilted her head, stepping closer. Her movements were deliberate, almost too smooth. "I tried a new blend from the farmer's market," she said lightly, though her voice carried a brittle edge. "Thought you might like a change." Jamal forced a smile, nodding. "Yeah, sure. Thanks." But as she turned away, humming faintly under her breath, he couldn't shake the feeling that her casual explanation didn't quite fit. Something about her tone, the way her fingers brushed against the countertop before retreating, it left an itch beneath his skin. Later that afternoon, while working in his office upstairs, Jamal noticed the mug still sitting untouched on his desk. He stared at it, the dark liquid catching the sunlight streaming through the window. A memory surfaced unbidden, a conversation weeks ago when his mother-in-law, Evelyn, had visited. Over dinner, she'd remarked how stressful running a business must be, her lips curling into a tight smile. At the time, he dismissed it as idle chatter. Now, the comment lingered like a shadow. Outside, a crow cawed sharply, breaking the silence. Jamal glanced toward the window, watching as the bird perched ominously on the fence post, its glossy feathers glinting in the light. For reasons he couldn't explain, the sight sent a shiver down his spine. Something wasn't right. And deep down, Jamal feared it wasn't just the coffee. Over the next few days, Jamal couldn't shake the unease that had settled in his chest. The strange coffee incident lingered in his mind like a splinter he couldn't remove. He tried to dismiss it as paranoia. After all, Claire had always been supportive of him and his business. But then came the headaches. It started on Monday morning. Jamal woke up with a dull throb behind his temples, unusual for someone who rarely suffered from migraines. By midday, the pain worsened, forcing him to take ibuprofen just to get through client calls at his marketing firm, Carter & Company. When he mentioned it to Claire over dinner, she brushed it off. "You've been working too hard," she said, placing a cool hand on his forehead. "Maybe you're coming down with something." But the headaches didn't stop there. On Wednesday, he felt nauseous after lunch, a sandwich Claire had made for him. Thursday brought dizziness, so severe he nearly stumbled down the stairs. Each time, Claire offered explanations: stress, dehydration, maybe even allergies. Yet her calm demeanor seemed rehearsed, her reassurances tinged with an odd detachment. Then there were the whispers. Late one evening, Jamal heard muffled voices drifting from the kitchen. He paused outside the doorway, catching fragments of conversation between Claire and Evelyn, who was visiting again. "Timing is crucial," Evelyn murmured, her tone sharp. "Can't afford mistakes this time." Jamal's pulse quickened. Mistakes? Timing for what? Before he could hear more, Claire laughed loudly, a sound too forced, and the voices stopped abruptly. Moments later, she appeared in the hallway, holding 2 cups of tea. "Oh, honey," she said brightly. "I thought you were asleep. Headache again." He nodded, accepting the cup but not drinking. That night, lying awake beside her, he replayed the snippets of their conversation in his head. What were they planning? And why did it feel like it involved him? By Friday, another anomaly caught his eye, a small vial tucked inside the trash bin under the sink. It looked medical, its label partially torn off. Jamal stared at it, his stomach tightening. Was it medication? Poison? His reflection in the stainless steel sink blurred as doubt clouded his thoughts. Something wasn't adding up, and Jamal knew he needed answers. By Saturday morning, Jamal's unease had hardened into resolve. He couldn't ignore the mounting anomalies any longer. The strange coffee, the headaches, the whispered conversations, and now the mysterious vial in the trash. Something was wrong, and he needed proof before jumping to conclusions. After Claire left for her weekly yoga class, Jamal seized the opportunity. Moving quickly but quietly, he began searching the house. His first stop was the kitchen pantry, where he sifted through bags of coffee beans. The new blend Claire mentioned wasn't labeled. It sat in an unmarked silver tin tucked behind other supplies. Suspicious, he opened it and sniffed cautiously. The scent was sharp, almost chemical, a far cry from the rich aroma of regular coffee. Next, he checked the bathroom cabinet. Inside, he found another small bottle tucked behind some over-the-counter painkillers. This one bore no label at all. His fingers trembled as he held it up to the light. Was this what had been making him sick? And if so, why? The final piece of the puzzle came when he ventured into Claire's home office. Her desk drawers were usually tidy, but today, one stuck slightly. Pulling it open revealed a crumpled receipt from a local pharmacy dated weeks ago. Scanning the items listed, activated charcoal capsules, herbal extracts, and something called tetrodotoxin solution, his blood ran cold. Tetrodotoxin? That was poison. Jamal snapped a photo of the receipt with his phone, careful not to disturb anything else. As he closed the drawer, guilt gnawed at him. Was he overreacting? Or was he uncovering something sinister? Either way, he knew he couldn't confront Claire yet, not without more evidence. That evening, while she prepared dinner, Jamal watched her closely. She hummed softly, chopping vegetables with practiced ease. For a moment, he doubted himself. Could the woman he loved really be capable of harming him? But then he remembered Evelyn's cryptic words. Timing is crucial. Whatever they were planning, Jamal decided he wouldn't wait around to find out. Tomorrow, he'd dig deeper and get answers. The next morning, Jamal sat in his office upstairs, staring at the photo of the pharmacy receipt on his phone. The words tetrodotoxin solution glared back at him, cold and clinical. His mind raced, trying to piece together how Claire, and possibly Evelyn, could be involved in something so dangerous. He needed context, clarity. And as he sifted through memories, fragments of their past began to surface. He thought back to when he first met Claire 5 years ago. She'd been charming, intelligent, and supportive, a stark contrast to the skepticism he often faced as a black business owner navigating predominantly white spaces. At the time, her encouragement had felt like a lifeline. When he launched Carter & Company, she'd helped design the logo, organize networking events, and even pitched in with client outreach. For the first time, success hadn't felt like a lonely climb. It had felt shared. But then came Evelyn. From the start, Jamal sensed her disapproval. During family dinners, she'd make veiled comments about risks and ambition, her sharp eyes lingering on him. Once, after a particularly lucrative deal, she'd remarked, "Not everyone appreciates someone rising too quickly." At the time, Jamal had brushed it off as generational snobbery. Now, those words carried a sinister weight. As these memories replayed in his mind, his phone buzzed, a text from his assistant reminding him of an upcoming investor meeting. Jamal sighed, rubbing his temples. The irony wasn't lost on him. His business was thriving, yet he felt more vulnerable than ever. What if Claire and Evelyn saw his success not as a triumph, but as a threat? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Claire appeared in the doorway, holding a tray with 2 steaming mugs. "I brought you coffee," she said sweetly, setting the tray down. Jamal forced a smile, his pulse quickening. "Thanks, but I'm good for now." Claire frowned slightly, glancing at the untouched mug. "You've barely eaten or drunk anything all week. Are you sure you're okay?" "I'm fine," he replied, his voice firmer than intended. Her gaze lingered on him, searching before she turned to leave. As she did, Jamal noticed something, a faint smudge of dirt on her wrist. Dirt? In the middle of the day? Later that afternoon, While Claire ran errands, Jamal decided to check the backyard shed. It was rarely used, mostly for storing gardening tools. But as he opened the door, the faint smell of chemicals hit him. On a shelf in the corner sat a small cardboard box. Inside were empty vials, syringes, and a crumpled lab coat. His stomach churned. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was confirmation. Jamal closed the box, his hands trembling. Whatever they were planning, it was bigger than he'd imagined. And he was running out of time. Jamal's heart pounded as he stood in the dimly lit shed, the weight of the evidence pressing down on him. He couldn't ignore it any longer. Claire and Evelyn were up to something deadly. But he needed proof that would hold up, something undeniable. That's when an idea struck him, his smartwatch. It had a voice recorder feature, discreet and unassuming. If he could catch them in the act, he'd have the confirmation he needed. That evening, Jamal feigned exhaustion after dinner, claiming a headache had returned. "I think I'll turn in early," he said, retreating to the bedroom. Instead of sleeping, he positioned himself near the door, activating the recorder on his watch. Minutes later, he heard soft footsteps approaching. Claire and Evelyn's voices drifted through the crack in the doorway. "He's getting suspicious," Claire whispered urgently. "The shed, it's only a matter of time before he finds out." Evelyn's tone was icy. "Then we need to move faster. The tetrodotoxin won't last forever. We've invested too much to let this slip away." Jamal's breath hitched. His suspicions were no longer abstract. They were real, confirmed by their own words. His hands clenched into fists, but he forced himself to stay still, letting the recorder capture every word. "What about the coffee?" Claire asked hesitantly. "Should we try again?" "No," Evelyn snapped. "He's onto it now. We'll have to use Plan B tonight while he's asleep. Just make sure you don't leave any traces this time." Plan B? Jamal's mind raced. What did that mean? Before he could process further, the voices faded as they moved downstairs. He waited a moment, then slipped the watch into his pocket, his resolve hardening. Whatever Plan B entailed, he wouldn't give them the chance to execute it. For the first time since the strange coffee incident, Jamal felt clarity, not just fear but purpose. They had shown their hand, and now it was his turn to act. Jamal waited until the house fell silent, his mind racing with plans. He couldn't confront Claire and Evelyn directly, not yet. Instead, he decided to sabotage their scheme before they could act. Quietly slipping out of bed, he crept downstairs, careful to avoid the creaky step near the landing. The living room was dark, but a faint light spilled from the kitchen. Peering inside, he saw Evelyn at the counter, her back to him. She was mixing something into a glass of water, a white powder dissolving slowly. His stomach churned as realization hit. Plan B wasn't just dangerous, it was lethal. Acting on instinct, Jamal grabbed a vase from the dining table and stepped into the kitchen. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice low but firm. Evelyn froze, the spoon clattering against the glass. Her face twisted into a mask of shock and then rage. "How dare you spy on us?" she spat, her composure crumbling. Before she could react further, Claire appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with panic. "Jamal? What's going on?" "You tell me," he shot back, holding up his phone. "I recorded your little chat earlier." "Poisoning me? Really? Was this your idea of solving things?" Claire's face went pale, her hands trembling. "It's not what it looks like. Save it," Jamal interrupted, his voice rising. "You think I don't know what tetrodotoxin is? You think I'm blind to all the accidents lately?" Evelyn stepped forward, her tone venomous. "You wouldn't understand, Jamal. Everything we've done is for Claire's future, for our family. Your success was never meant to last." Her words struck like a slap, but Jamal refused to let them shake him. "So you'd kill me for my business? For money?" "It's not about the money," Claire cried, tears streaming down her face. It's complicated." But Evelyn wasn't listening. Her desperation turned feral as she lunged for the glass, intending to finish what they'd started. Without hesitation, Jamal slammed the vase onto the counter, shattering it. The noise echoed through the house, startling them both. "You're done," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "This ends now." The shattered vase lay on the counter, its shards glinting under the kitchen light. Jamal stood firm, his breathing steady despite the storm raging inside him. Evelyn's face was flushed with anger, her hands clenched into fists, but Claire had crumpled into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if time itself had frozen. Jamal broke the silence first. "I'm calling the police," he said calmly, pulling out his phone. The words hit like a thunderclap. Evelyn's eyes widened in panic, and she lunged toward him, grabbing at the device. But Jamal was ready. He sidestepped her easily, his years of self-defense training kicking in. With a swift motion, he pinned her arm behind her back, forcing her to the floor. "Don't make this worse," he warned, his voice low but commanding. Evelyn struggled briefly before going limp, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. Claire looked up at him, her tear-streaked face filled with shame. "Please, Jamal, don't do this. I didn't want it to go this far. You should have thought about that before poisoning me," he replied sharply, though his tone softened slightly. Despite everything, seeing her broken like this stirred something deep within him, a flicker of the love they once shared. But it wasn't enough to undo what had been done. He dialed 911, keeping one eye on Evelyn as he explained the situation to the operator. "There's evidence in the shed and the kitchen," he added, his voice unwavering. "And there's an audio recording too." As he hung up, the distant wail of sirens began to pierce the night air. Jamal exhaled slowly, the weight of the past week finally lifting. He glanced at Claire, who sat hunched over, her head in her hands. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Was all of this really worth it?" She didn't answer, but her silence spoke volumes. When the police arrived minutes later, Jamal handed over the phone with the recording, pointed them to the shed, and recounted everything he'd uncovered. Officers quickly secured the scene, cuffing Evelyn and leading her away while another officer comforted Claire, who seemed too dazed to resist. For the first time in days, Jamal felt a sense of control, not just over the situation, but over his own life. Whatever came next, he knew he'd faced the worst and survived. The interrogation room at the police station was cold and sterile, its fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on the walls. Jamal sat across from Claire, who had been brought in for questioning after the officers separated her from Evelyn. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, trembling visibly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Only the faint hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. Finally, Claire broke down. "I never wanted to hurt you, Jamal," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." "Then why did it?" Jamal asked, his voice calm but firm. He leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "You poisoned me. You lied to me. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" She flinched at his words, her gaze dropping to the table. "It wasn't my idea. It was Mom's. She convinced me that your success was tearing us apart. That if you kept rising, I'd lose you forever." Her voice cracked. "She said we could redirect things to make sure we stayed safe, secure. But I didn't know she meant this." Jamal's jaw tightened as pieces fell into place. Evelyn's disdain for him, her veiled comments about ambition, it all made sense now. She'd manipulated Claire, weaponizing her insecurities against their marriage. And Claire, blinded by fear and misplaced loyalty, had let herself be pulled into the scheme. "She used you," Jamal said quietly, more to himself than to her. "And you let her." Claire nodded, choking back sobs. "I'm so sorry, Jamal. I thought I was protecting us. But every step just made things worse. When you started getting sick, I panicked. I didn't know how to stop it without confessing everything." Her confession stung, not because it revealed new truths, but because it confirmed his worst fears. The woman he loved had betrayed him, not out of malice, but out of weakness. Still, there was no excusing what they'd done. The door opened, and an officer entered with a file folder. "We found correspondence between Evelyn and someone online," he said grimly. "Looks like she purchased the tetrodotoxin under a fake name. There's also evidence tying her to other failed attempts targeting successful black entrepreneurs." Jamal's stomach churned. This wasn't just personal, it was systemic. Evelyn hadn't acted alone. She was part of something darker, more insidious. As the officer left, Jamal turned back to Claire, his expression unreadable. "You have a lot to answer for," he said finally. "But the truth is out now. What happens next is up to you." By dawn, the house was swarming with activity. Police officers combed through every room, collecting evidence: coffee tins, vials, syringes, and a box from a shed. Forensic technicians dusted for fingerprints while detectives interviewed Jamal in the living room. The once cozy space now felt sterile, invaded by the cold machinery of justice. Claire had been taken to a separate facility for further questioning, her tearful apologies echoing in Jamal's mind long after she'd left. Evelyn, on the other hand, remained defiant, refusing to cooperate beyond cryptic smirks and muttered denials. Her arrogance infuriated him, but Jamal knew the evidence would speak louder than her lies. As the sun rose higher, Jamal stepped outside to clear his head. A neighbor approached cautiously, concern etched on their face. "Is everything okay, Jamal? We heard sirens." "It's under control," he replied, forcing a reassuring smile. He didn't elaborate. Some truths were too heavy to share yet. Back inside, an officer handed him a card. "We'll need you to testify once we build the case," the man said. "But for now, stay safe. If anyone contacts you about this, let us know immediately." Jamal nodded, gripping the card tightly. The legal process would take time, but at least the immediate danger was over. As the police packed up and departed, leaving behind yellow tape across the front door, Jamal stood in the driveway, staring at the house that no longer felt like home. His phone buzzed, a text from his best friend, Marcus. "Heard what happened? You good?" Jamal hesitated before replying. "I will be. For now, survival was enough." Days later, Jamal found himself seated in a conference room at the police station, flanked by detectives and prosecutors. On the table lay a dossier of damning evidence: the pharmacy receipts, audio recordings, forensic analysis of the tetrodotoxin, and even emails linking Evelyn to a network targeting successful black entrepreneurs. The case was ironclad. Evelyn sat across from them, her arms crossed defiantly, while Claire, now visibly broken, remained silent beside her lawyer. When the lead detective laid out the findings, Evelyn's composure cracked for the first time. "You can't prove anything," she snapped, though her voice wavered. Jamal leaned forward, his tone measured but cutting. "You poisoned me. You tried to destroy my life because you couldn't stand seeing me succeed. But it backfired." Claire buried her face in her hands, unable to meet his gaze. Evelyn, however, shot him a venomous glare. "This isn't over," she hissed. "People like you don't belong where they aren't wanted." The prosecutor stepped in, presenting the final piece of evidence: a recorded confession from Claire detailing Evelyn's manipulation and their shared plan. Evelyn's face turned ashen as the weight of the truth sank in. Her arrogance crumbled into desperation. "She lied." Evelyn spat, pointing at Claire. "I did this for her. No one forced you," Jamal said coldly. "Your hate made this happen, and now you'll face the consequences." As officers escorted Evelyn out, her protests echoed down the hallway. Claire remained behind, tears streaming silently. For the first time, justice felt tangible and inevitable. The weeks that followed were a blur of court hearings, depositions, and media attention. The case against Evelyn and Claire became public, sparking outrage and conversations about systemic racism and economic sabotage. Journalists labeled it the poison plot, highlighting how Evelyn's actions fit into a broader pattern targeting black entrepreneurs. For Jamal, the scrutiny was overwhelming, but also validating. In court, the prosecution painted a damning picture. They presented Evelyn as the mastermind, driven by jealousy and prejudice, manipulating Claire to execute her schemes. Claire, in turn, pled guilty to lesser charges in exchange for testifying against her mother. Her testimony revealed years of emotional abuse, painting Evelyn as a calculating figure who thrived on control. When the verdict came, Evelyn was sentenced to 20 years without parole for attempted murder and conspiracy. Claire received probation and mandatory counseling, though the damage to their relationship was irreparable. As the gavel struck, Jamal felt no triumph, only relief that justice had been served. Afterward, he met briefly with Claire outside the courthouse. She looked smaller, somehow diminished. "I hope one day you can forgive me," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can," Jamal replied honestly, "but I hope you find peace." With that, they parted ways, two lives forever altered by betrayal and truth. For Jamal, closure came not in forgiveness, but in moving forward. He returned to Carter and Company, more determined than ever to succeed, not just for himself, but as a testament to resilience. Months later, Jamal stood on the balcony of his new office, a sleek, sunlit space overlooking downtown Atlanta. Carter and Company had grown exponentially since the trial, fueled by both his determination and an outpouring of support from the community. Clients and colleagues alike admired not just his business acumen, but his courage in facing adversity head-on. The scars of the ordeal remained, though. Trust no longer came easily to him. He'd ended things with Claire formally, filing for divorce shortly after the trial. It wasn't anger that drove the decision. It was clarity. Their marriage had been built on love, yes, but also on cracks he hadn't seen until they shattered completely. Moving on was painful, yet freeing. One evening, as he sipped tea instead of coffee, Jamal reflected on what he'd learned. The betrayal had taught him about resilience, not just against external threats, but internal doubts. He realized now how often people like Evelyn existed in the world, trying to dim the light of those who dared to rise. But their hate only strengthened his resolve. Success wasn't just personal, it was a statement, a refusal to be silenced or sidelined. He also understood the importance of vigilance. The strange illnesses, the whispered conversations, they were signs he'd ignored at first. Now, he trusted his instincts more than ever, knowing that intuition could be a lifeline. As the city lights twinkled below, Jamal felt a quiet pride. His journey wasn't perfect, but it was his own. And through every challenge, he'd emerged stronger, wiser, and unbroken. The past couldn't be erased, but the future? That was entirely up to him. Have you ever uncovered a betrayal or a lie from someone close to you? Share your experience in the comments. If you enjoyed this and want more content on inspiring Black Stories channel like this, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching, and remember, even in the depths of betrayal, resilience can transform pain into purpose.